deep in the steaming jungles of southern Mexico, where rivers snake through mist and the earth hides secrets. Beneath its roots lies the shadow of a forgotten people. Long before the Maya built their pyramids, long before the Aztecs ruled their empire, there was another civilization, one so old, so mysterious that even its name is borrowed. We call them the Olmec. Imagine it, towering basalt heads, each carved with human faces so lifelike they seem to watch us across the gulf of 3,000 years. Jade figurines with strange otherworldly features, symbols carved into stone that hint at a lost language we still cannot read. These are the traces of a people who shaped Mesoamerica, and yet who disappeared without leaving their true story behind. Were they the mother culture of all who followed? What gods did they worship? How did they move stones weighing 40 tons through swamps and rivers without wheels or beasts of burden? And why, after centuries of greatness, did their cities crumble into silence? Tonight we journey into the jungles of Veracruz and Tabasco to uncover the mystery of the Olmec, the first great civilization of the Americas, and one of history's most enduring enigmas. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Welcome to the Old World Files, all specific history where we uncover hidden stories and explore the mysteries of history like never before. Don't miss out, subscribe now and join our journey through the past. Our story begins around 1200 BCE. On the floodplains of southern Veracruz, the land was fertile, but unpredictable rivers overflowed. Swamps swallowed, fields and the jungle pressed in on every side. Yet in this wild and untamed world, a new power began to rise. These were the Olmec, and from the mud and stone they built something extraordinary: San Lorenzo, the first great city of the Americas. San Lorenzo was not just a village of farmers. It was a carefully planned ceremonial center raised high above the floodplain on massive earthen platforms. From here, Olmec rulers commanded their people, their armies, and their gods. Imagine broad plazas, colossal monuments, and an intricate system of canals, redirecting water through the city. A marvel of early engineering. The Olmecs thrived on farming, cultivating maize, beans, and squash, but they were also master traders. Their influence spread across hundreds of miles. From the mountains, they brought basalt to carve their monumental heads. From distant lands, they acquired jade, obsidian, and shells. Some of these materials traveled vast distances, proof of a network that reached far beyond their jungle home. And it was here at San Lorenzo that the first of the colossal stone heads was raised. Towering monuments, each weighing up to 40 tons, carved with individualized features, lips, eyes, helmets. These were not anonymous statues. They were portraits, most likely of rulers, kings, whose power was so great they demanded to be immortalized in stone. Think of the effort: hundreds of men dragging stones across rivers and swamps without wheels, without beasts of burden. To achieve this, the Olmec must have had an organized state. Disciplined laborers and rulers whose commands were absolute. But their art was not only colossal. In their hands, jade came alive, carved into delicate figurines. Polished masks and curious jaguar babies with haunting expressions. These objects tell us the Olmec world was filled with symbols, rituals, and mysteries we still struggle to decode. By the time San Lorenzo reached its peak, it was the largest and most powerful settlement in Mesoamerica. Other cultures traded with it, borrowed from it, and felt its influence. For this reason, many call the Olmec the mother culture of the Americas, the spark that ignited all that would follow. Yet, as with so many ancient stories, greatness was fragile. By 900 BCE, San Lorenzo's monuments were toppled, its power fading. But this was not the end, far from it. The Olmecs would rise again, even stronger, at a new sacred center, La Venta. When we step into the world of the Olmec, we step into a realm where the boundary between human and animal earth and spirit was never fixed. To the Olmec, life was filled with forces unseen, and the survival of their people depended on keeping these powers in balance. Their rulers were not just kings. They were intermediaries between the world of humans and the world of the gods. The most haunting image from Olmec art is the were-jaguar, a strange, hybrid creature, part human, part feline, with downturned mouths, almond-shaped, eyes and an expression. Both fierce and sorrowful, these figures appear in stone carvings, jade, figurines and monumental thrones. Scholars have debated their meaning for decades. Were they depictions of gods, shamans in a trance, or mythical children born of unions between women and powerful jaguar spirits? To the Olmec, the jaguar was more than just an animal. It was a symbol of strength, ferocity, and dominance, the king of the rainforest. But it was also a creature of mystery, stalking silently through the night. The jaguar's ability to move between land and water may have symbolized a power to cross spiritual boundaries, to move between the human and divine worlds. And the jaguar was not alone. In Olmec art, we see serpents, crocodiles, eagles, and monstrous beings with flame, eyebrows and snarling mouths. These weren't simple decorations. They were sacred, symbols part of a complex belief system that would echo through later civilizations like the Maya and Aztec. Rain, God's maize, God's fertility, spirits. Their seeds are found in Olmec carvings. One of the most extraordinary examples of their religious artistry are the altars of La Venta, carved from massive blocks of stone. These were not simple platforms but thrones. On them, rulers are shown emerging from the open, mouths of caves or jaguar-like creatures. To the Olmec, caves were sacred gateways to the underworld, places where the earth opened to connect with the divine. Imagine a king seated on such a throne performing rituals that invoked the forces of rain, maize, and fertility, binding his people to the gods. And what of their rituals? Evidence suggests the Olmecs played an early version of the Mesoamerican ball game, a sacred contest where winners and losers could be tied to sacrifice. Blood to the Olmec was life itself, the ultimate offering to the gods who controlled rain, sun, and crops. Then there is the matter of their masks. Smooth greenstone faces, eerily lifelike, but never designed to be worn. They were placed in offerings buried in ritual caches beneath plazas and temples. Were they meant as gifts to the gods, as representations of ancestors, or as faces for spirits that could never be seen? Each mask is a reminder of how central ritual was to their world. Perhaps the most tantalizing clue to their spirituality is the Cascajal block, a slab of serpentine bearing 62 carved symbols discovered in Veracruz. Some believe this is the earliest writing system in the Americas, created by the Olmec. If true, it would mean the Olmecs had not only gods and rituals, but also sacred texts, words carved in stone to bind their stories. Yet the symbols remain undeciphered, their meaning hidden. Were they records of rituals, myths of gods, the voices of rulers long lost? We may never know. What is clear is that the Olmecs lived in a world of transformation. Shamans may have entered trances seeking to merge with animals or spirits. Rulers claimed divine ancestry, perhaps even presenting themselves as gods in human form. Everything from colossal heads to jade babies told a story of humans reaching for the divine of a people desperate to secure their place in a world that was as dangerous as it was fertile. The Olmecs gave us the first sacred images of Mesoamerica, symbols of jaguars, caves, serpents, and maize that would reappear again and again in later civilizations. Their gods would echo through centuries, reshaped by the Maya, reinvented by the Aztecs. And yet for the Olmec, these symbols were new, raw, and powerful. But if the Olmecs mastered the world of the spirit, the world of man was far less certain. By the time their cities flourished, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Because while their gods promised fertility and rain, the earth could also bring destruction. And their empire, built on power and belief, would one day face collapse. By the middle of the first millennium, BCE, the Olmec had reached a peak of cultural brilliance. Their cities, San Lorenzo and La Venta, had stood as centers of trade, ritual, and power. Their colossal heads looked out over plazas where rulers commanded both men and gods. Their jade, obsidian, and sacred symbols had spread far across Mesoamerica. And yet by around 400 BCE, the Olmec world began to unravel. What happened to them remains one of history's greatest puzzles. There are no surviving Olmec chronicles, no written records to tell us their story. Instead, we are left with broken monuments, abandoned cities, and the haunting silence of a civilization that seemed to vanish almost overnight. At San Lorenzo, the once great capital, the monuments were deliberately toppled. Colossal heads were defaced, altars smashed, and sculptures buried. This was no slow decline. It looked as though power had been torn down violently, perhaps by rebellion, invasion, or civil war. Was this the work of an angry people turning against their rulers, or rival factions fighting for dominance? At La Venta, the second great ceremonial center, we see the same story. Around 400 BCE, the city was abandoned. Ritual offerings were buried, monuments mutilated, plazas left to the encroaching jungle. Why would a civilization so powerful simply walk away from its sacred heart? Some scholars suggest the land itself betrayed them. The Olmec lived in a region of rivers and swamps rich in fertility, but also vulnerable to disaster. Volcanic eruptions, shifting rivers, or floods could have destroyed fields and forced populations to flee. Others argue climate change may have played a role. Perhaps the rains failed crops, withered, and famine drove the people to desperation. Yet another possibility lies in trade. The Olmec thrived on networks that stretched for hundreds of miles, bringing jade from the Motagua Valley, obsidian from the highlands shells. From the Gulf Coast, if those routes shifted, if new powers rose elsewhere, the Olmecs may have been cut off from the lifeblood of their economy. Without trade, their rulers could not command loyalty, and their great centers would crumble. But perhaps the most haunting question is this: did the Olmec truly disappear? Or did they transform? Some believe that while their great cities fell, their people did not vanish. Instead, they were absorbed into rising cultures, the Zapotec, the Maya, and others. Their gods, their rituals, their ball game, their symbols of jaguars and serpents, these survived, carried forward into new civilizations. In this sense, the Olmecs never died. They simply became the foundation upon which others built. Still, the intentional destruction of their monuments lingers as a mystery. Why destroy the very icons of their power? Was it an act of ritual closure marking the end of an era? Or the rage of the oppressed tearing down the faces of kings who had failed them? We may never know for certain. By the time of their disappearance, around 400 BCE, the Olmec had ruled Mesoamerica for nearly 800 years. And yet their story ends not with a grand battle or conquest, but with silence, the jungle reclaiming what was once theirs. The colossal heads remained half buried in earth, gazing into the void as if keeping watch for a world that no longer existed. It is this silence, this unanswered mystery, that makes the Olmec so captivating. Unlike the Maya, they left us no codices. Unlike the Aztec, no Spanish chroniclers wrote their story. What we know comes only from their stones, their masks, their ruins. Their voices are gone, and yet their legacy endured. The civilizations that followed inherited their sacred symbols, their myths of rain, gods and jaguar spirits, their rituals of blood and maize. The Olmec may have fallen, but their shadow stretched across centuries. Still, the question remains: who were they? What language did they speak? What secrets are still buried beneath the jungles of Veracruz and Tabasco? The fall of the Olmec is a mystery, but mysteries, as we know, are never truly silent. They whisper, waiting to be uncovered. For centuries after their fall, the Olmec were ghosts, their cities swallowed by jungle, their stories erased from memory. The Aztecs, centuries later, knew of strange, colossal heads scattered across Veracruz and Tabasco, but even they did not understand who had carved them. To them, the giant stones were relics of an age before their own, the works of gods or giants. The Olmec had slipped into legend. It wasn't until the 19th century that their world began to re-emerge. Farmers clearing fields stumbled upon massive stone faces half buried in the earth. At first, these discoveries seemed unbelievable. How could people so ancient without metal, tools or beasts of burden have carved and transported such monoliths? Some dismissed them as curiosities, while others believed they must have been relics of Africa or even Atlantis. The idea that they belonged to an unknown civilization shocked the world. The turning point came in 1862, when a colossal head was described in Tabasco. But it wasn't until the early 20th century that serious excavations began. Archaeologists like Matthew Sterling of the Smithsonian Institution traveled deep into the swamps and jungles, uncovering site after site. San Lorenzo, La Venta Tres Zapotes. What they found was astonishing. Colossal heads, intricate altars, jade offerings buried in careful patterns. Piece by piece, a picture of the Olmec began to form. At La Venta, excavators uncovered something extraordinary, a massive ceremonial complex with a pyramid of earth rising above the jungle and dozens of colossal monuments arranged in ritual order. Beneath its plazas, caches of jade, serpentine, figurines and even mirrors were discovered, deliberately buried as offerings. These were not random ruins. They were deliberate, sacred, organized. This was evidence of a civilization, not a scattered people. The colossal heads became the most famous symbols of the Olmec. Each one was unique, carved with individual features, broad noses, fleshy lips, helmets, perhaps used in ritual or in war. Some scholars believe they are portraits of rulers immortalized in stone to display their power for eternity. To stand before one of these heads today is to feel the presence of a forgotten king staring across millennia. Yet for all their discoveries, the archaeologists realized how little could be explained. They uncovered jade masks that were never meant to be worn, altars depicting rulers emerging from the mouths of caves, and figurines arranged in precise patterns and buried. Why bury such treasures? Why destroy monuments deliberately? The answers remain elusive. One of the most startling finds was the Cascajal block, discovered in the 1990s but believed to be Olmec in origin. Carved with over 60 unique symbols it may represent. The earliest writing system in the Americas. If true, the Olmec were not only the first great builders but also the first to inscribe their thoughts. Yet the block remains undeciphered, a text we cannot read, a voice locked in silence. As archaeologists pieced together more, they also began to see the Olmec not as an isolated mystery, but as the foundation of later Mesoamerican civilizations. The ball game, the jaguar, guards the rituals of blood and maize, all first appear in Olmec art only to re-emerge centuries later in Maya temples and Aztec codices. The Olmec had left no written history, but their fingerprints were everywhere. Still mysteries abound. How did they move the colossal stones from mountains more than 50 miles away through swamps and rivers? How did they feed thousands in their ceremonial centers? What language did they speak? And why, after centuries of brilliance, did they vanish into the jungle? Every discovery answered one question and raised 10 more. The Olmec remain both the first great civilization of the Americas and one of its greatest enigmas. Archaeologists gave them a place in history, but the truth of their lives, their beliefs, their voices still lingers in shadows. By the mid-20th century, the Olmec were no longer forgotten. They were recognized as the mother culture of Mesoamerica, the civilization that lit the torch carried by all who followed. And yet, even as their statues stand in museums and their artifacts rest in glass cases, the heart of their mystery remains buried in the earth. For the Olmec story is not just about what we know, it is about what we do not know. The unanswered questions, the silent stones, the symbols waiting to be read. They remind us that history is not a finished tale but a puzzle still, missing its most important pieces. And perhaps somewhere in the jungles of Veracruz or Tabasco, beneath the roots of ceiba, trees, or buried beneath river, mud, more secrets of the Olmec still wait to be found. The Olmec may have vanished as a political power by 400 BCE, but their story did not end there. In fact, their greatest legacy may not be what they built during their own time, but what they left behind for the civilizations that followed. For in the myths, rituals, and symbols of later Mesoamerica, the Olmec still live. Consider the Maya centuries. After the Olmec collapse, the Maya rose in the jungles of Guatemala and the Yucatan, building cities of stone, studying the stars and writing complex histories in books of bark paper. Yet many of the Maya's most sacred traditions had their roots in Olmec soil. The Maya maize guard the rain. Deities, the jaguar rulers, all trace their ancestry to Olmec carvings. Even the great ball courts where Maya kings wagered their lives echo the earliest Olmec games. The same is true for the Aztec, who rose nearly 2,000 years after the Olmec had disappeared. Their myths spoke of earlier peoples who had shaped the world. Before them, giants builders, keepers of divine knowledge. The colossal Olmec heads discovered by the Aztec were seen not as human works but as relics of gods. To the Aztec, the Olmec were a civilization, so ancient and mysterious that they seemed almost supernatural. But it wasn't only myth that endured. The Olmec introduced the idea of a ruler as divine, mediator, a king who was more than just a man, a bridge between the gods and the people. This concept would become central to all later Mesoamerican civilizations. Their gods, their rituals of blood and sacrifice, their sacred caves and pyramids would echo for centuries. The Olmec had laid the foundations of Mesoamerican religion, politics, and art. And yet, despite this lasting influence, the Olmec themselves remained cloaked in mystery. We still do not know what language they spoke. We cannot read their symbols. We do not know why they abandoned their cities or why they smashed their monuments. We can only guess at their thoughts, their myths, their voices. Perhaps that is why they capture our imagination so powerfully. Civilizations like the Maya or Aztec left behind records, books, temples, and histories that we can study. The Olmec, by contrast, left only their silent monuments. And in silence, mystery thrives. Standing before a colossal head today, one cannot help but wonder, who was he? A king, a warrior, a shaman? What did he see in his lifetime? Did he lead armies? Did he command great rituals beneath the sun? Or was his likeness carved to honor an ancestor, a figure whose story has long since been lost? His stone face gives no answer. It only watches as it has for 3,000 years. But perhaps this is the true power of the Olmec. They remind us that history is not complete. That even in a world mapped by satellites and studied by archaeologists, mysteries remain mysteries as old as civilization itself. Their story is not a closed book, but a fragment of a puzzle waiting for new discoveries, new questions, new answers. So the Olmec live on not only through the cultures they inspired, but through the mystery they left behind. A mystery that calls us back to the jungles of Veracruz and Tabasco, to the river valleys, where their cities once rose, and to the colossal heads that still stand, guard over their forgotten empire. In the end, the Olmec are both the beginning and the enigma of the Americas, the first civilization and the first mystery. And as long as their stones remain half buried in the earth, their story will never truly be over. And so we arrive at the end of our journey, a journey through the jungles of Veracruz and Tabasco, across rivers and swamps, and deep into the heart of the first great civilization of the Americas. The Olmec, once rulers of vast ceremonial centers, masters of stone and spirit, have long since vanished. Their cities are silent, their language is lost, their voices do not reach us. But their legacy lingers in every Maya glyph, in every Aztec myth, in every jaguar god or sacred bull game. We see the shadow of the Olmec. They were the foundation, the blueprint, upon which later empires were built. And though their power crumbled, their influence has never truly died. Yet it is the mystery that keeps them alive in our imagination. The colossal heads staring across time with unknowable expressions. The jade figurines carved with haunting precision. The symbols on the cascajal block waiting still unread. The Olmec do not tell us their story, they invite us to search for it. Perhaps somewhere in the jungles of Mexico, beneath the roots of ancient trees, more secrets lie hidden. Temples, undiscovered writings, waiting to be deciphered, offerings buried in the earth. Each discovery is not an ending, but a beginning. Another piece of a puzzle that may never be complete. The Olmec remind us that history is not just what we know. It is also what we do not know. Their silence speaks louder than words. Their monuments outlast the voices of kings. They are the first great mystery of the Americas, and perhaps they always will be.